Hey guys, so hopefully YouTube does this video quality justice because I did get a new camera recently, and definitely a big thanks to my fellow YouTubers for helping me with this, most notably Ruggles, Bear, as well as Squiddy and other YouTubers from the small content creator Discord, and also my childhood friend Rikka as well. Anyways, enough of me rambling, let's just get to today's video where we're going to talk about some of the best rogue decks in the current meta based on Dueling Book data, as well as some of the regional topping information from the past couple of weekends. Now, as always, definitely go check out those discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Sleeves as well as singles. Most notably, Trading Card Mint now has their pre-orders up for Maze now, and you can use code Hakuna7 for 7% off, or you can also use code Hakuna5 for 5% off at Card Brawlers and Tier 0 games. Now, in terms of the overall meta tier list that I provided last week, this is what it looked like. Now, I did provide a big caveat back then in terms of, how volatile the tier score was, because we were only relying on just one weekend worth of regionals this time around. So we're basically, for this video, we're going to say tier elements, Vanquish Soul, even Dragon Link, and Chimera, we're going to say that they're tier 2 for now, and let's just focus on the rogue decks for today's video. So let's just get started with this month's rogue tier list by the data, and we're going to start with heroes. So this is kind of an interesting choice because with Dark Law banishing effect, that's actually pretty good in a meta where Fire King, they kind of need to be destroyed and sent to the graveyard. So that's why shifter kind of decks, I assume, will probably still have some strength right now in the format. So heroes actually, usually the past few formats I've been covering, they've been getting one or two regional tops, but right now already has, they have a few regional tops to start this format, so it's looking pretty good, and is a really solid rogue option that of course has been quite popular for some time. You have a lot of other strong cards like Dark Angel, which is FTK against a lot of strategies really, and Plasma is like a one-sided skill drain. DP prop can be pretty nice as well, so I think heroes, considering the past half year or so, this is a pretty good spot as well for them. So next we have Tr-Brigade. So this is kind of iffy because technically I'm talking about more so Tr-Brigade Fire King, because they're the ones that's actually topping right now. And when you're mixing with Fire King, is that really rogue? Questionable, but for now let's include them because technically I think with the Tr-Brigade stuff, they are still notably different than just Fire Kings, for example. I think it's still a pretty cool choice. Tr-Brigade has always been kind of a fair deck, and I know there's a lot of Tr-Brigade enthusiasts out there, and so I think this is probably, I'm assuming, the best way to play Tr-Brigade right now. At least they're the ones that at least doing well competitively, and I know from my experience though, I found that when you can get rid of their Fire King field spell with let's say Cosmic, it's a lot more deadlier against the Tr-Brigade version, because they might have something like Appaloosa up as well, which will just completely die off because of that field spell, whereas if they only had the Fire King stuff, then it might have been actually a little beneficial for them. So next we have Flunder, and now as I mentioned earlier, any kind of shifter effects probably will go pretty hard against Fire King in the current format, and Flunder, especially at the regional level, has always done pretty solid. It's just at the YCS level, past half year or so, they've kind of struggled, or I should say past few months more so, but you know what, still pretty confident in Flunder. I recently did a profile with of course legendary Henko Chow, who pretty much tops most regions with Flunder, so you can check that profile out again, but online, this deck always has a really high win percentage, almost, this is 59%, usually 60% is kind of a tier 1 range kind of deck, so it's always does really well online. So next we have Unchained. Of course, it's fallen off quite hard since last month prior to the ban list, with it being tier 1 and all, and with that Shrivara hit to 1, it was definitely notable. I mean, I think from a purely strength perspective, I'm sure the potential is still kind of there. Of course, it's consistency and ability to play through hand traps is definitely greatly suffered, but at the same time, I think it's more so people just kind of want to move on with the new deck. And one of the downsides with Unchained now is that usually a lot of rogue decks, one of the benefits of it is that some players may not know what the deck actually does, but for Unchained, it was just very recently a tier 1 deck, and now it's kind of in the rogue strategy, but people are still going to know how to stop this deck, so that's one of the downsides right now. But you know what, it does have a couple regional tops so far. I recently did a profile with my friend Chris, who also tried a wanted engine plus the Inferno stuff, because they're also a fiend, so it was kind of pretty fun to see. But the ones that are topping, of course, is more so the quote-unquote pure kind of Unchained. So next we have Sky Striker, which is of course quite interesting, and I'm sure you've seen that deck list floating around where there was a Gores in the main deck in 2024. I don't know if that was actually real, but if it was, that's pretty funny and kind of cool. Usually does pretty well on rogue tier lists, just because online it just sees so much play. Typically it's very popular, although at the same time with all these players trying to run it, and some of them are not very good obviously, because this deck does require a good pilot to play it optimally. That's been shown time and time again. So 41% win percentage online, kind of typical with Sky Striker, unfortunately. Doesn't really have the best overall win percentage. I'm sure the ones that do play well can at least still do pretty decent with it. It's going to get some new support. I don't know exactly when, but I know it's coming. And who knows, maybe they put Engage to 3 just around that time as well. So I'm sure you can always trust on Sky Striker. Next, we have Super Heavy Samurai. I recently also provided a profile with this with TCG Alabir, aka Gianluca. So you can check that out. It was like actual pure Super Heavy Samurai, not like kind of like an engine as you saw in some, like, let's say Swordsoul lists or even Vanquish Soul lists. So I think it's obviously not nearly at the whatever tier 1 status it was for that 3-week period, but nonetheless, it's, you know, it's a pretty consistent engine still. It has some pretty cool synchro plays. He also showcased like some Xyz rank 4 plays as well that the deck can do pretty well. So I think at least especially from a budget perspective, the deck core for Super Heavy Samurai is incredibly cheap. Even when it was briefly tier 1, it was still incredibly cheap, at least for the deck core. So that is something you can look into. So next we have Dark World. This did get a regional top last week, so but you know, unfortunately win percentage was overall not doing too well. I mean, in a format right now with like Nib, Droll being played a lot, and then of course Shifter effects still being around as well, it's probably not going to get a lot of regional tops. It never has, to be honest with you, even after like the initial structure deck hype, although it was pretty popular online at least. But you know what, it's not really a deck I can really recommend. I'm partly biased though, because I really don't want to play against this deck, and I don't want to put more Dark World players into the world, but at least it is pretty budget friendly for the most part, excluding like the staples. Next, you have Swordsoul. Speaking of budget, this is actually a really good budget choice as well in terms of playing competitively, especially because it's a deck that really, for the most part, would not be playing SP just because they're like worm locked or whatever for the most part. So I think it's really solid. You know, as a synchro strategy, obviously the more popular synchro strategies have become Vanadium, as well as like something like Centurion, which is more new. But nonetheless, it's proven to at least get like regional level tops for sure. So far has not had any, but I'm pretty confident it will get one at some point, and so this is another really good budget option. Next, we have Resonator, or like Bestial Resonator. I also provided a recent profile with Calvin, who topped the remote regionals with the Resonator strategy. Basically, he also played Bestial, Horus, and also Adventure, so a lot of the good stuff. So I think scoring wise, like technically I think this deck deserves to be higher. It's just that online it sees practically no play at all, but nonetheless I think it's pretty cool. For the most part, I think the Resonator part is actually quite a small package. It's more so like with the Crimson Gaia continuous spell, kind of provides like a very consistent recurring way of like synchro summoning and making those kind of plays. And of course, horror stuff with any deck can be pretty insane and just provides a lot of grind. And on top of that, you have something like the adventure stuff for the Omni Negate, and then of course something like the Bestial, like the Regain, that always is really good for the grind game in terms of draws and summons as well. Next we have Marincess, which of course, as I always say, you know, it seems to get like some kind of like YCS level top every like 2-3 months or so, so it's always there if you know how to play it well. It's another deck that's actually very budget. The one list that did top 8 a regional, it was something like $85 USD for the entire list, and this is another deck, presumably they would not be playing SP anyways, because they're like a lot of times they're waterlocked, so you know, it's a deck that can play like a lot of hand traps, which is kind of nice in this current format. So something to consider as well for those of you looking for a budget option. So moving on to another cyber strategy is Salamangreat. Kind of similar to Marincess, can also play a lot of hand traps. This deck has like, you know, rank 4 plays. It has OTK lines with like access code and update jammer. Even has like an counter trap, which is always nice for any deck, and then some pops with like the rage. It kind of struggles, I think, going like second when it gets like its bodies popped. Basically, they kind of need to like go into that initial link summon. But you know what, it is a rogue strategy. Budget wise, technically it's not the most budget. If I recall, the newer Salamangreat cards, they were actually kind of pricey. No regional tops so far, actually. Unfortunately, I think it's actually been kind of disappointing the last few months, because with the initial release of the support, they actually did get some tops here and there, even at a YCS level, but lately kind of went back down in terms of play and also success. But you know what, it is one of the more fan favorite strategies, so perhaps someone can make it work. Next we have Makanko, which of course post Zolde ban, clearly it actually got a couple regional tops already, so you know what, it's looking pretty good. I know this deck can be played going first or going second. Going first though, I'm not really sure what the end board is anymore. I'm assuming without Zolde they don't go for the Acid Golem lock anymore. Obviously there's like a more going second oriented version, especially with like Kaijus, and it's just able to deal a lot of damage. And I'm sure like Snatch Seal coming off the list probably can only help. It is a nice little equip spell to have as well, so pretty cool to see that it is able to get some success post ban list. Next we have Dinosaur. To be honest with you, I was a little surprised that this made it this high. I guess, you know, while there's no regional tops so far, I guess it is played decently online, at least among rogue decks. And you know what? In the past few formats, they've actually had like 1 or 2 regional tops, so the potential is there. Usually though, the ones at top are more like the combo oriented strategy with like the scrap stuff and going first. You don't really see that going second OTK dinos anymore, at least in terms of those that are topping regionals. But you know what? It's another one of those fan favorite strategies. Hopefully Mist can come back to like 2 in a future list. Maybe they'll be a little more cautious with that, but pretty cool to see. Next, we have Virtual. There's another deck that unfortunately does not have any regional tops so far, but I think there might still be some potential for this deck as well, just because similar to like Hero, Virtual can put up something like Shen Shen, which is another kind of Macrocosmos on legs. Maybe not as good as Dark Law though, but you know, on top of that, Virtual typically has something like a Chuche Pop, which I guess depending on the matchup maybe isn't a great, but then you usually have something like either Dragoon or like Kaliga, for example, that can be pretty strong. So, you know, has some pretty good synchro arsenal. The one downside of this deck is that it is known to be pretty bricky though, so that is something to consider. But you know what, let's wait a little bit. Hopefully it can get some regional tops, because I believe it actually did get some at the tail end of the last format. So next we have Dogmatica Invoke, which actually topped the Utah Regional recently, which is really cool. So I actually personally played Dogmatica Invoke 2 years ago now, which of course feels like quite some time ago. Although at the same time, when I played that deck, it was already way past its prime. And I remember thinking the deck kind of felt quite subpar. I was a little surprised I was ever tier 1, even though I also played through that format. Because, you know, when my opponent had a Mechaba, it just felt like it was so strong. But then when I put up Mechaba, it just felt really weak. So nonetheless, I really liked this deck, and I'm super glad to see it top. It did also make use of like the Bestial engine as well, with like regain and stuff. Wasn't playing like the typical like Winda stuff you would see back in like, you know, 2020 or whatever. But nonetheless, with like Dogmatica stuff, there has been some new Dogmatica support as well in the last year. That was not played in this particular list. And also, I guess if you're playing any kind of Dogmatica package, for the most part, like usually you can also side something like Secret Village Spellcaster, which can be really, really strong depending on a lot of decks that you face. Next, we have Exosister. Not too much to say about this deck, to be honest with you. I mean, like, it's another shifter deck, but realistically, if that's kind of like your end goal, like, you might as well just play Flunder and you'll probably do better. And also, you know, something like Floodgates that I could play, let's say, like Gozen Match, you know, that got limited on the recent ban list. So I think, you know, you can never underestimate Exosister, right? Like Steven Santoli, I'm sure, can always make this work. But nonetheless, so far, and also in the last little bit, has not had too much competitive success, at least. Next, we have Rikka, which of course got a lot of hits on that ban list, which is kind of weird, because if a deck like Vanadium or Branded didn't get any hits, but then Rikka got multiple hits at once, I don't know. That didn't really make sense, but unfortunately, you know, they did. I think they are, though, at least getting some kind of support with like Aromage cards. So far, no regional tops. I'm sure it'll top some like European event at some point, though, even with these hits. So, you know, among the small pool of players that are still playing at 55% win percentage, that's still pretty solid, honestly. So I'm curious to see like how the end board changed. Like, definitely, if you still play Rikka, let me know in the comments, you know, what they kind of try to do nowadays. So next we have Trap Trick. So it's a deck that has not had any regional tops so far. I don't think it's had that much success in the last half year or so. It actually the structure deck came out almost a year ago now, and at that point it was really insanely popular, right? At one point it was actually the second most played deck online. Definitely far from those days now already. Unfortunately, I don't think it's been pretty good for Trap Tricks for the last like at least half year or so. It always kind of struggled going second. It is a very good entry deck for competitive play for like newer players though, because it is also quite budget, so something you can look into, but eventually you probably want to move on to something else. And lastly, we also have Infernoble, which, to be fair, I think this deserves to be way higher, but it's just that, you know, aside from the no regional top so far, of course, post the Zolde ban, I think just not a lot of players are running this online as well. From what I understand, you know, even with the Zolde ban, they can still play pretty well. So, you know, 63% among those small pool of Infernoble players, that's also pretty impressive. So, you know what, let's just give it a bit more time. You know, if Mikanko can top post Zolde, I'm sure Infernoble can find some tops here and there as well. And then we lastly have Punk, which honestly has not been doing too hot last half year or so. You know, usually like the more, as I mentioned earlier, like the more popular synchro strategies is like Vanadium. You have something like Centurion. So there's not too many reasons to go with Punk. I did do a recent deck profile with my friend Tristan. He was playing like Horus Punk, and there were some synergies there in terms of synchro lines of play. But for the most part, this deck has not seen too much play lately, and 40% win percentage among all players is also pretty abysmal, unfortunately. Alright guys, so that was it for the rogue tier list spider data for this month. Hopefully you found that interesting and helpful in terms of making your new rogue deck choice. You should stay tuned. I'm going to do more frequent regional report kind of breakdowns of some of the topping decks and just some additional data associated with it. So I'll have that up in the next couple days or so. So stay tuned for that. Anyways, a big thanks to all of you for watching the video. Huge thanks to my Patreons as always for the continued support, and well, take care guys.